So why is multi-factor authentication important?
So multi-factor authentication is important because stealing credentials basically can be eliminated by verifying your identity. If you're using an MFA, such as a phone-based MFA, or even an email verification, you basically can prevent breaches because the attackers will not have access to the phone of the identity, won't be able to authenticate their, verify their identity, and eventually prevent lateral movement.
Great. Okay, so that's a good segue. Can you talk to us about explain what lateral movement is, and then why we keep on losing the battle with lateral movement?
Sure. So the kill chain starts with intrusion, initial compromise of workstations that usually are not the final target for the attackers. So those low level of user space credentials eventually will need to be escalated. And in order to get into the final target, attackers use lateral movements. Lateral movements is basically the process of hopping from one endpoint to another until arriving to the domain controller, the finance server, the PII server, or any other destination that the attacker originally wanted to get to. And lateral movement is really hard to detect because most attackers using credential authentications that are legitimate. They're using Kerberos or NTLM for authentications. From a traffic perspective, the network authentication looks very similar whether you're an attacker or a legitimate user. And so one of the challenges we have today is identify which one of the lateral movements is benign and which one is malicious. So once we're moving the kill chain phases, we're starting with initial compromise. Attackers will start elevating their local users, usually escalating to a system or a local administrator could be done by injecting a malicious code into existing system DLL. Once you are under a local administrator privileges, you can look at escalating the domain users. And the way to escalate domain users is leveraging some flows within authentication protocols. For example, NTLM keeps the hashes within the memory. So dumping the hashes will help attackers authenticate as if they are an end user with a higher privilege. Once you escalate the privileges, the next step is to run reconnaissance and identify within the network what services are in, which accounts are, which endpoints are, and where is the final target. And once you understand how the network looks like, after reconnaissance, you start moving laterally until you get into the end destination. Again, being in line, monitoring those traffics will help with not only detection, but prevention. Unfortunately, a lot of the enterprise organizations today detecting those attacks after the fact. They're leveraging log files in order to send them into a SIEM that eventually aggregate all the attack surfaces to one detection. But it's a long time, a long dwell time of an attack between the initial compromise and the final detection and actions by security operations. What we suggest is, in B-sides, I talk about it, is let's look at being inline and use adaptive enforcement, not only detecting, but potentially verifying user authentication using MFA, or even reducing the privileges of a user, restarting their password, and eventually depending on the risk, even blocking.